I returned to my uncle's estate after 13 years away, and what I found changed my life forever. The bus ticket was a flimsy piece of paper, but it felt as heavy as a tombstone in my pocket. For 13 years, I hadn't dared to even think the name of the town, let alone consider going back. Blackwood Creek. It was a place that existed only in the faded photographs of my memory, a ghost limb of a life I'd been forced to amputate. Now, a letter from a lawyer I'd never met was pulling me back. The words cold and formal on thick cream stationery. We regret to inform you of the passing of your uncle, Mr. Arthur Blackwood. As his sole listed heir, your presence is required. Heir. The word felt like a joke. The only thing I'd ever inherited from my uncle was a sense of profound and unshakable abandonment. He'd sent me away when I was 10, a week after my parents' funeral, with a single suitcase and a social worker who smelled of mothballs and stale sympathy. No explanation, no goodbye. Just a car pulling away down a long gravel driveway, and the image of his silhouette shrinking in the doorway of the great, dark house. For years, I told myself I hated him. It was easier than admitting how much it hurt. In the foster system, you learn to build walls out of anger because it's the only material that's readily available. It's a better defense than sorrow. Now, at 23, those walls were starting to feel less like a fortress and more like a prison. I was working a dead-end job washing dishes in a city that didn't know my name, living in a room so small I could touch both walls if I stretched. The letter wasn't just a summons, it was a crack in that prison, a terrifying, blinding sliver of light. And so I bought the ticket. If you're watching this, maybe you know what it's like to be called back to a place you've spent years trying to escape. Maybe you've had to face a ghost from your past. If who know that sometimes the only way forward is to go back. The bus wheezed to a stop at a rusty sign that read, "Welcome to Blackwood Creek." The paint was peeling, and the town looked smaller, sadder than I remembered. The air smelled different here, of damp earth, pine needles, and rain that was always threatening to fall. It was the smell of my childhood. A taxi, the only one waiting, took me the 5 miles out of town. The driver, an old man with a kind, weathered face, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You look familiar," he said, his voice a low rumble. I just shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. The gates to the Blackwood estate appeared at the end of the road, just as imposing as I remembered. But now they were chained and padlocked, strangled by ivy. The wrought iron was flaking with rust, like dried blood. This wasn't the grand entrance from my memories. It was the gateway to a forgotten kingdom. "This is it," I told the driver. He pulled over, his brow furrowed with concern. "Place has been empty for years. Old Arthur," he kept to himself. "Sad what happened." He didn't elaborate, he didn't have to. The decay was a story in itself. I paid him and he drove away, leaving me alone with the silence and the looming gates. A man in a dark, ill-fitting suit was waiting for me. He introduced himself as Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer. He had a thin face, tired eyes, and the kind of practiced patience that comes from dealing with other people's grief for a living. He fumbled with a set of keys, finally breaking the rusty chain. "Leo, I presume," he said, not unkindly. "I'm sorry for your loss." I nodded, the words catching in my throat. What loss? The man I lost was the uncle who read to me by the fire, not the stranger who had cast me out. The man who died was someone I didn't know at all. We walked up the long, winding driveway. The gravel was overrun with weeds, and the once manicured lawns were now waist-high fields of tangled grass. The house stood at the top of the hill, a hulking silhouette against the gray sky. It was a beautiful old Victorian, but neglect had settled on it like a shroud. Paint peeled from the walls, shutters hung at odd angles, and a few windows on the top floor were boarded up. It looked haunted, not by ghosts, but by time itself. Inside, Mr. Abernathy led me to the study. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light cutting through a grimy window. Furniture was draped in white sheets, making the room look like a congregation of phantoms. He sat behind a large mahogany desk, the only piece of furniture uncovered, and motioned for me to take the chair opposite. "Let's be direct, Leo," he began, steepling his fingers. "Your uncle did not leave behind a straightforward inheritance. In fact, he left behind a considerable amount of debt." He slid a folder across the desk. It was thick with papers, bank statements, overdue tax notices, liens against the property. The numbers were staggering. The estate wasn't a windfall, it was a sinking ship. "He mortgaged the property heavily over the last decade," Abernathy explained. "The bank will foreclose within 90 days. The back taxes are substantial. Frankly, the estate is worth less than what is owed on it." I stared at the papers, my mind reeling. I had come here with a knot of anger and confusion, but I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected to find that my uncle, the man I remembered as being so proud and formidable, had died in ruin. "So what does that mean for me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It means you have one viable option," he said, his tone shifting from sympathetic to pragmatic. He pulled another, much thinner folder from his briefcase. "A development company, Vantage Corporation, has been trying to acquire this land for some time. They see the potential for a golf resort. They've made a final offer." He opened the folder. The number on the paper made my breath catch. It was enough to pay off all the debts, all the taxes, and still leave me with a sum of money that could change my life completely. I could buy a small apartment, go to school, leave the dish pit forever. I could be free. "It's a generous offer," Abernathy said, watching my face. "More than fair, considering the state of the property. All you have to do is sign, and you can walk away from this place and all its complications. You can have a fresh start." He slid a pen across the desk. For a moment, I saw my future laid out before me. An easy future, a clean break. I could take the money and never look back. I could let the house, the land, the memories be bulldozed into oblivion. It was what he deserved, wasn't it? The man who had sent me away. But then I looked around the dusty room at the ghostly shapes under the sheets, and a different feeling began to surface. It wasn't anger, it was a deep, aching curiosity. Why had he let it all fall apart? Where did all the money go? Selling felt too easy. It felt like letting him go without ever understanding why he'd let me go first. "I need some time," I said, pushing the pen back. "I'd like to stay here for a night. To think." Abernathy looked surprised, then sighed, a flicker of pity in his eyes. "As you wish, Leo. The keys are yours. The power and water are still on, for now, but don't take too long. That offer won't last forever." After the lawyer left, the silence in the house was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with the dust of unspoken words and forgotten years. I stood in the grand foyer, the set of old iron keys feeling cold and alien in my hand. One for the front door, one for the back, one for the cellar, and a small, ornate one whose purpose I couldn't guess. Each key felt like a question. I started walking, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I pulled a sheet off a sofa, the dust billowing up in a cloud that caught the fading afternoon light. The furniture was old but well made, the kind of thing that was meant to last for generations. It was all still here, a museum of a life I was once a part of. I drifted from room to room, the dining room, with its long, empty table where we'd once had Sunday dinners, the living room with the huge stone fireplace that had always seemed like a giant's hearth to my 10-year-old eyes. I could almost hear the crackle of the fire, almost smell the scent of burning oak and my uncle's pipe tobacco. My journey through the house was a pilgrimage through my own past. Every corner held a memory, sharp and vivid, as if it had happened yesterday. There was the window seat in the library where I used to hide and read for hours. There was the scratch on the floor by the kitchen where I'd crashed my toy truck. And there was the small, dark stain on the rug in the hallway where I'd spilled a glass of grape juice and had been terrified of my uncle's wrath, only for him to kneel, look at the mess, and then let out a surprising, rumbling laugh. He wasn't always cold. I had to remember that. There were good times. Before. Before the accident that took my parents. Before I came to live with him. Before his laughter faded and was replaced by a quiet, brooding sadness that seemed to fill every room in the house. Finally, I made my way upstairs. My feet knew the way to my old room without me having to think. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and my heart clenched. It was exactly as I had left it. The model airplane I'd been building was still on the desk, half finished. My collection of adventure novels was still on the shelf. The faded poster of the solar system was still tacked to the wall, the planet Jupiter slightly peeling at the corner. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been packed away. It was as if he'd expected me to walk back in the very next day. For 13 years, this room had been waiting for me. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet washed over me. It was a chaotic mix of grief, anger, and a sorrow so profound it felt like I was drowning. Why? Why leave my room untouched but send me away? Why preserve the memory of a boy you didn't want? I stumbled back from the doorway and sank onto the top step of the staircase, burying my face in my hands. The easy answer, the one I'd clung to for years, was that he was cruel. A heartless man who couldn't be bothered with an orphaned nephew. But the room, that perfectly preserved time capsule, didn't feel cruel. It felt sad. As dusk settled, casting long, distorted shadows through the house, a chill began to seep into my bones. The house was cold, not just from neglect, but from a lack of life. I needed to find some blankets. I remembered a large linen closet in the main hallway, but it was empty. I'd have to brave my uncle's bedroom. His room was at the far end of the hall. I'd never been allowed in there as a child. It was his private sanctuary. Pushing the heavy oak door open, I was met with the faint, lingering scent of him. Old books, cedar, and something faintly medicinal. Unlike the rest of the house, this room felt lived in, though stark. A bed, neatly made, a wardrobe, a single armchair by the window, overlooking the darkening woods. And his desk. It was the same one from the study, a massive piece of mahogany, but this one was locked. My eyes scanned the room. Where would a man like my uncle hide a key? He was a creature of habit and logic. Not under the mattress, not taped to the back of a drawer. It would be somewhere meaningful. My gaze fell on the fireplace. It was smaller than the one downstairs, made of dark, river-worn stones. I remembered him telling me once that every old house has its secrets, built right into the foundations. I ran my hands over the cool stones, feeling for anything loose, and there it was, a single brick slightly recessed that wiggled under my touch. I pried it out. Behind it, in the dark, dusty cavity, sat a small, ornate iron key, the one from the key ring that I couldn't identify. It fit the lock on the desk perfectly. With a soft click, the drawer slid open. It was mostly empty. Some old pens, a tarnished silver letter opener, a few stray paper clips, but right in the center, lying on the bare wood, was a single envelope. It was thick, creamy stationery, just like the lawyer's letter. On the front, written in my uncle's familiar, spidery handwriting, was my name. Leo. My heart hammered against my ribs. I picked it up. The envelope was sealed with a wax stamp bearing the Blackwood family crest, a raven with a key in its beak. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it and began to read. "My dearest Leo," it began. The words blurred for a moment. He hadn't called me that in years. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have returned to a place that must hold nothing but painful memories for you. I cannot blame you for whatever hatred you feel towards me. I have earned it. I know you have questions. Questions I was never brave enough to answer in person. I am a coward, Leo, but I was never cruel, not to you. Please do not believe that. I sent you away not because I didn't want you, but because I had to. It was the only way to keep you safe. The answers you deserve are not in this letter. They are in this house. This house holds the truth of everything. Do not let them take it from you. Do not sell it until you understand." The money they offer you is poison. Find the raven with the broken wing. It will show you the way. Your loving uncle, Arthur. The letter left me with more questions than answers. Loving uncle? Keep you safe? The raven with the broken wing? It sounded like something out of one of the fantasy novels I used to read. The lawyer's words echoed in my head. The offer won't last forever. The money felt like a tangible, solid path out of my life, while my uncle's words were cryptic and ethereal. But they had planted a seed of doubt. The money is poison. Why? What could possibly be so terrible about taking a fortune and starting over? I read the letter again and again, the paper growing soft and worn under my fingertips. The cold, distant man I had constructed in my memory began to crumble, replaced by the image of a sad, secretive man who wrote letters he never intended to be read until after his death. The anger that had been my constant companion for 13 years began to recede, replaced by a profound, aching confusion. I spent the rest of the night in a restless sleep, curled up in the armchair. In his room, the letter clutched in my hand, I dreamt of ravens and shadows, of whispers in the dark hallways of the house. I woke up to a gray dawn, the house even more silent and imposing in the morning light. The choice was still there, sitting on the desk in the study. Sign the papers and walk away, or stay and chase the ghost of a riddle left by a dead man. Looking at my uncle's handwriting, I knew I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to know the truth. My search began in the library. It was the heart of the house, a two-story room lined wall to wall with books. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and leather. If there was a raven with a broken wing, this seemed like the place to find it. I scanned the thousands of spines, looking for titles with birds, for anything that might be a clue. Hours passed. I pulled down dusty tomes of poetry, history, science. Nothing. My frustration grew. Was this a wild goose chase? A final cruel joke from a man I never really knew? I started looking at the books themselves, not just the titles. The Blackwood family crest was stamped onto the inside cover of many of the older volumes. A raven with a key in its beak. I checked hundreds of them, all identical, all with perfect wings. Defeated, I sank into one of the large leather armchairs. My eyes drifted around the room, taking in the details. The rolling ladder, the globe in the corner, the intricate woodwork on the fireplace mantel. The mantel was carved with scenes from nature, vines, leaves, animals. And there in the center was a series of carved birds. My heart leaped. I ran to the fireplace, my fingers tracing the wooden carvings. They were small, detailed. A hawk, an owl, a finch, and a row of ravens. I examined each one. The first was in flight. The second was perched on a branch. The third, its left wing was chipped. A piece of the wood had broken off, leaving a jagged edge. The raven with the broken wing. It wasn't in a book. It was part of the house itself. My fingers explored the carving. The bird was no bigger than my thumb. I pressed on it, nothing. I tried to twist it. It wouldn't budge. Then I remembered the crest, a raven with a key. The key. I looked at the bird's tiny carved beak. There was a minuscule hole no bigger than a pinprick. I thought of the small, ornate key from my uncle's desk, the one that opened the desk drawer. It was too large. This required something much smaller. I searched the library again, this time with a purpose. I looked for keyholes, for hidden compartments, for anything out of the ordinary. In a small, unassuming box on a high shelf, labeled drafting tools, I found it. A set of tiny, antique keys, the kind used for old diaries or jewelry boxes. One of them had a raven etched into its head. With trembling hands, I climbed onto a chair and inserted the tiny key into the raven's beak on the mantel. It fit. I turned it. There was a soft, mechanical click, and a section of the bookshelf beside the fireplace swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening. A hidden passage. My breath caught in my throat. This was real. My uncle wasn't just a sad, lonely man. He was a man with secrets deep enough to build into the very walls of his home. I hesitated for only a moment, then stepped into the darkness. The passage was tight and smelled of dust and cold stone. It led to a small hidden room, more of a closet, really. There was no light except for what spilled in from the library behind me. In the center of the room was a single heavy wooden chest. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid, my muscles straining. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed newspaper clippings, was a large metal lockbox. This one was secured with a heavy-duty padlock. There was no key. I felt a surge of frustration, another dead end. But then I noticed an envelope taped to the lid of the chest. It was addressed to me. This letter was different. The handwriting was shakier, more urgent. "Leo," it said, "if you've found this, you've been more clever than I gave you credit for. I am sorry for this game of riddles, but I couldn't risk this falling into the wrong hands. The key to this box is not in the house. It is with the only person I ever trusted. Go to the general store in town. Ask Martha for the package Arthur left for you. She will know. Be careful, son. From this point on, nothing is a game." Martha, I remembered her. Martha Gable. She ran the town's general store. She was an old friend of my uncle's, a kind woman with a warm smile who always used to give me a piece of candy when we visited. Could she really be a part of this? The thought of leaving the house, of talking to someone, made me anxious. I had been cocooned in the past for 2 days. The outside world, with its lawyers and its deadlines, felt like a threat. But I had to know what was in that box. I drove my uncle's old, dusty truck into town. It started with a reluctant groan, as if it too were being woken from a long slumber. The town was just as I remembered it, but the life had been leached out of it. Several storefronts were boarded up. The people on the street looked tired. Blackwood Creek was a town on the decline. Martha's general store was one of the few places that looked the same. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, the same cheerful sound I remembered from my childhood. The store smelled of sawdust and coffee beans. Martha was behind the counter. She was older, of course, her hair now completely white, but her eyes were the same, sharp and intelligent. She looked up, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Leo," she said, her voice soft with disbelief. "My goodness, it really is you. I heard about Arthur. I'm so sorry." "Thank you, Martha," I said, my voice hoarse. He left a letter. He told me to come see you. He said you have something for me." Her expression shifted, growing serious. She nodded slowly, then disappeared into the back room without a word. She returned a moment later with a small, heavy package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. She placed it on the counter. "He left this with me 10 years ago," she said, her voice low. "He told me, if my boy ever comes back, give this to him and only him. He made me promise. He was so worried, Leo, especially at the end." "Worried about what?" I asked. She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not my place to say. He was a good man, your uncle. Complicated, proud. But he loved you. Don't ever doubt that." She looked me straight in the eye, and for the first time I believed it. I took the package. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, I could feel the distinct shape of a key. This was it. The final piece. As I turned to leave, Martha called out to me, "Leo, be careful. There are people who bought this town, but they don't own its memories. Some things are worth fighting for." Back in the hidden room, the air felt charged with anticipation. I unwrapped the package. Inside was a heavy, industrial-looking key and another letter. This one was brief. "This is the last step, Leo. What's in this box is the reason for everything. It's the truth I was too weak to tell you and the burden I couldn't bear alone. Forgive me. A." The key slid into the padlock with a satisfying thud. I turned it, the mechanism unlocked with a loud clank, and I lifted the lid of the metal box. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't know what I was expecting. Money? Gold? Some kind of precious heirloom? But it was none of those things. The box was filled with documents, old yellowed legal papers, blueprints, financial statements, and photographs, dozens of them. They were pictures of a building I didn't recognize, first intact, then charred and ruined. There were also newspaper clippings, all with the same headline: Tragedy at Blackwood Mill, Factory Fire Claims 12 Lives. The date on the clippings was from 13 years ago, a week before my parents died. A few weeks before my uncle sent me away, I picked up a thick file labeled Vantage Corp. Internal Memos. My hands were shaking. I started to read, and the world fell out from under me. The documents laid out a story of corporate greed so monstrous it was hard to comprehend. The old Blackwood Mill had been failing for years. Vantage Corporation, then a smaller, more aggressive development firm, wanted the land it sat on for a new commercial project. But the mill owner refused to sell. According to my uncle's meticulous notes and the internal memos he had somehow acquired, Vantage had arranged for the mill to be burned down. It was arson. They had planned it for a weekend night when the factory was supposed to be empty, but a small crew of maintenance workers was doing an unscheduled overnight shift. 12 people. 12 people died so a corporation could build a shopping center. The police had ruled it an accident. Faulty wiring. Case closed. But my uncle hadn't believed it. He had started his own secret investigation. The money he'd borrowed against the estate, the money that had driven him into ruin, it hadn't been spent on himself. The ledgers I'd seen suddenly made sense. He had used it to hire private investigators, to pay off sources, to gather this evidence piece by piece over a decade. He had bankrupted himself in the pursuit of justice for 12 people he didn't even know. And then I found the last folder at the bottom of the box. It contained a sworn affidavit from a man named Daniel Porter, a former Vantage employee. He was the one who had set the fire. He confessed everything, detailing who gave the orders, how they did it, and how they covered it up. But the affidavit was a copy. In a separate sealed envelope was a microcassette tape. I didn't have a player. I had to drive back into town to an old electronics repair shop. The old man behind the counter had one, a dusty relic from a bygone era. I paid him $20 to use it. I put on a pair of headphones, inserted the tape, and pressed play. The voice that filled my ears was my uncle's. It was weak, strained, recorded not long before he died. "Leo," he began, and the sound of my name in his voice, so raw and full of pain, broke something inside me. "If you are hearing this, then you have found it all. You know the truth about the mill. What you don't know is how your parents are connected to this." I froze. My parents? They had died in a car crash. A drunk driver, that's what I'd been told. "It wasn't a drunk driver, Leo," my uncle's voice cracked. Your father was an investigative journalist. He was working on a story, a big one, about corporate corruption. He'd gotten a tip about the mill fire. He was getting close to the truth, closer than anyone else. Vantage found out. The accident. It wasn't an accident. They ran him off the road. They killed them to silence them. A wave of nausea washed over me. I ripped the headphones off, gasping for air. The floor of the small shop seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My entire life, the bedrock of my own story, was a lie. My parents hadn't just died, they had been murdered. I found your father's notes after, my uncle continued, on the tape, his voice choked with grief. I picked up where he left off. I found the witness, Daniel Porter. I convinced him to talk. But Vantage has deep roots in this town. They have eyes and ears everywhere. They found out I had the confession. They came to the house. They threatened me. They said if I went to the police, if that evidence ever saw the light of day, the same thing that happened to your parents would happen to you. You were 10 years old, Leo. You were all I had left of my sister. I couldn't lose you too. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. So I made a choice, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I chose you. I sent you away, where they couldn't find you, where you would be just another face in the system. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I let the world think I was a monster, a cold-hearted recluse who abandoned his own family. It was better than letting you die. I spent the rest of my life watching from a distance, making sure you were safe, and keeping this evidence hidden. I couldn't bring the guilty to justice without endangering you, so I waited. I hoped that one day, when you were a man, you would be strong enough to finish what your father and I started. This is your inheritance, Leo. Not the land, not the house. This, the truth. What you do with it is up to you. Just know that I loved you. I always loved you. The tape ended with the sound of a ragged breath, and then silence. I sat there in the dusty shop, the world outside muted and distant, and I cried. I cried for the parents I barely remembered, murdered for telling the truth. I cried for the uncle I had hated for 13 years, a man who had sacrificed his reputation, his fortune, and his entire life to protect me. And I cried for the lost, lonely boy who had never understood that his abandonment was not an act of rejection, but a desperate, heartbreaking act of love. You know, there are moments in your life that split it cleanly in two. There's the before, and there's the after. Listening to that tape was my after. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, about my place in the world, it was all redefined in that one moment. Maybe you've had a moment like that. A piece of news, a discovery, a conversation that changed the entire landscape of your past and your future. It's terrifying, isn't it? To realize the ground you've been standing on isn't solid, but it's also a strange kind of gift. Because once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. You have to act. You have to choose who you're going to be in the after. I'm sharing this part of my story, this deeply personal moment, because I think it's something we all face in some way. We all inherit stories, and sometimes we inherit battles that weren't finished. If this is resonating with you, if you've ever had to pick up the pieces of a past you didn't create, you're not alone in this. This community is for all of us who have found ourselves at a crossroads, with the truth in one hand and a difficult choice in the other. Your story matters. Now let's get back to what happened next. I drove back to the estate in a daze. The world looked different, sharper. The trees seemed greener, the sky a more intense shade of gray. The truth had changed my vision. When I got back to the house, my phone rang. It was Mr. Abernathy. "Leo," he said, his voice crisp and businesslike. "I've just heard from Vantage Corporation. They know you've been delaying. They're prepared to increase their offer substantially. This is a life-changing amount of money, son. It's their final offer. They need an answer by tomorrow morning." The timing was no coincidence. They must have known my uncle had died. They were moving in for the kill, to bury their secrets along with the old house. The choice was laid out before me, stark and brutal. Option A, take the money, millions of dollars. I could disappear, live a life of comfort and security. I would never have to wash another dish, never have to worry about rent. All I had to do was let them bulldoze this house, this land, and the evidence buried within it. I could let the truth die with my uncle. No one would ever know. Option B, release the evidence. I could honor my father's work and my uncle's sacrifice. I could get justice for the 12 people who died in the fire and for my parents. But it would mean taking on a powerful, ruthless corporation. It would mean a legal battle I couldn't afford, public scrutiny and danger, and it would mean losing the money, all of it. The estate would be consumed by debts, and I would be left with nothing but a cleared conscience. For a moment, a flicker of the old me, the scared, pragmatic survivor, was tempted. The money was safety. It was a future. But then I looked around the dusty study, at the box of evidence on the desk. This was my inheritance. My uncle hadn't left me a fortune. He had left me a responsibility. My father hadn't just died. He had been killed in the line of duty, a soldier for the truth. Taking that money wouldn't be a fresh start. It would be a betrayal of everything they had stood for, everything they had died for. It would be poison. "No," I said into the phone, my voice clear and steady. "What?" Abernathy sounded confused. "Leo, you don't understand." "No, I understand perfectly now," I interrupted. Tell Vantage Corporation there is no deal. The property is not for sale. I hung up before he could argue. The decision was made. A strange sense of calm settled over me. I finally knew who I was. I was not the abandoned orphan. I was the son of Arthur Blackwood's sister. I was the son of a truth seeker. I was the keeper of a promise. My uncle's last letter had mentioned a journalist, a young reporter he had been corresponding with, someone he thought was trustworthy. Her name was Sarah Jenkins. I found the correspondence in his files. She worked for a national newspaper. I spent the rest of the day scanning every document, every photograph, every page of my uncle's notes onto a portable hard drive. I made copies of everything. I wrote out a timeline, a summary of the events, just as my father might have done. As night fell, a storm rolled in. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled around the eaves of the old house. It felt fitting, as if the world outside was reflecting the tempest that had been my life. I knew Vantage wouldn't just accept my refusal. People who killed to protect their secrets don't just walk away. I sat in the dark living room, the box of evidence at my feet, and I waited. Around midnight I saw them, a pair of headlights cutting through the rain, coming slowly up the long driveway. It was a large black SUV. It didn't belong here. They parked at the bottom of the drive, their lights off, just two dark shapes in the downpour. They were here to intimidate me, or worse. My heart pounded, but it was a different kind of fear now. It wasn't the fear of a scared boy. It was the sharp, focused fear of a soldier in a trench. I had the truth, and I wasn't going to let them bury it. I grabbed the hard drive and the original microcassette. I went to the back of the house, slipped out the kitchen door, and ran into the woods. The rain soaked me to the bone in seconds, mud sucking at my shoes. I knew these woods. I had played in them my entire childhood. I knew every path, every hollow tree. I ran until I was sure I wasn't being followed, then circled back toward the main road, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had to get this to Sarah Jenkins. I had to finish the story. The next 48 hours were a blur. I took a bus to the nearest major city, never staying in one place for more than a few hours, always looking over my shoulder. I felt like a fugitive, but I was also filled with a sense of purpose I had never known. I finally met Sarah Jenkins in a small, anonymous coffee shop. She was young, sharp, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through me. I was a mess, mud-stained, exhausted, and running on pure adrenaline. I told her everything. I gave her the hard drive. I played her the tape of my uncle's confession. She listened intently, her expression growing more and more serious. When I was finished, she just looked at me for a long moment. "Your father was a legend," she said quietly. "One of the reasons I got into this business. To do what he did." She took the hard drive. "Let me make some calls. Find somewhere safe to lie low. This is going to get very loud, very fast." She was right. The story broke 3 days later. It was the front page headline in every major newspaper. Vantage Corp linked to decades-old arson, murder cover-up. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. The stock plummeted. Federal investigations were launched. The town of Blackwood Creek, once a quiet place of forgotten secrets, was suddenly at the center of a national scandal. The executives my uncle had named were arrested. Daniel Porter, the man who set the fire, was taken into protective custody, and his original signed affidavit was recovered from a safe deposit box where my uncle had hidden it. The story of my father's accident was reopened. The story of my uncle, the eccentric recluse, was rewritten. He was no longer the man who had let his family's estate crumble into ruin. He was a hero, a quiet, stubborn man who had sacrificed everything for the truth. The legal battle for the estate was complicated, just as Abernathy had warned. The debts were real, but the story had captured the public's imagination. A pro bono law firm, one that specialized in fighting corporate corruption, took on my case. Donations poured in from a foundation for investigative journalism. It was a long fight, but in the end, we won. The liens were settled, the back taxes paid. The estate was saved. It wasn't mine anymore, not really. We worked with the town and the families of the fire victims to turn the Blackwood estate into a public trust. The house is now a small museum and a community center. The grounds are a public park, a memorial to the 12 people who lost their lives at the mill. It's a place of peace now, of remembrance. I didn't get rich. I didn't walk away with millions. I walked away with something far more valuable. I live in Blackwood Creek now. I have a small apartment above the old general store. Martha gives me a discount on rent. I'm taking online classes, studying to be a paralegal. I want to work for the kind of law firm that helped me, the kind that fights for the little guy. The ghosts are still here. They always will be. There's a scar on my heart where my family used to be, but it's not a festering wound anymore. It's a clean scar, a reminder of the battle that was fought and won. I often walk through the park on the estate grounds. I see children playing where the lawns were once overgrown. I see people sitting on benches, reading in the sun. The house is filled with light and laughter again. I cleared my uncle's name. I finished my father's last story. I found my own. I learned that inheritance isn't about what you're given. It's not about money or property. It's about the stories you choose to carry and the values you choose to uphold. My uncle left me a legacy of quiet courage. My father left me a legacy of fierce integrity. They gave me a choice, and in making it, I finally found my home, not in the four walls of a house, but within myself. I am my father's son. I am my uncle's heir, and I am finally free. This whole journey started with a letter that pulled me back to a painful past. It forced me to confront the stories I told myself and to uncover the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And what I want to leave you with is this. Don't be afraid of your own ghosts. Don't be afraid to go back to the places that scare you. Sometimes the answers we need, the freedom we're searching for, are hidden in the very last place we want to look. The truth can be a heavy burden, but it's also the only thing that can truly set you free. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, if it made you think about your own family, your own legacy, I did that's more valuable than money. I read every single one, and I believe with all my heart that our stories are the most powerful things we will ever own. Be brave, be truthful, and never forget that even in the darkest of places,